Mr. Chancellor and Madam Vice Chancellor and distinguished faculty and friends, and with all my gratitude, supporters of Monash University, which is truly a great university. I can't tell you how honored I am and how thrilled my wife Sonia and I are to be here with you. And even though they're trying to work us to exhaustion in the last 2 days with lots of meetings and speeches and events, it's only more and more thrilling as the day goes on. There's so many wonderful and exciting things happening in this city, in your wonderful country, and in this great university. So we're completely energized by what we have seen, and with so many ideas and excitement, and so much excitement and a tremendous amount of inspiration that we have received in the last 2 days from your leadership. So first, a tremendous thank you to you, and just to express how profoundly honored I am to be part of this community as an alum now of Monash University. Let me also say how much we feel at home. I hope it's not presumptuous to say so. We're New Yorkers and love New York and love a city where one can walk and see exciting things at every corner, and where one sees a microcosm of the world before one's eyes in the coffee shops, in the art, in the street art, in the people walking on the street. And I hope it's okay to say we feel very much as New Yorkers home in Melbourne, because you have this wondrous city that is just a joy to be in, and to see the vistas, to see the lights out this evening, and to have had the chance to begin to partake of its many splendors. So I hope it's all right to give you fair warning that we'll be back, and I hope back often. And as I'll explain in my remarks, working with the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, with Rebecca Brown, the director, with John Thwaites, the chairman of MSDI, is a phenomenal joy and a phenomenal benefit for the world. I'm lucky to direct, on behalf of the UN Secretary General, a global network called the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And from the earliest days, John Thwaites came and said, we have something exciting at Monash and we'd like to be part of this global network. And John and Rebecca have not only lived up to that initial introduction and suggestion, but have become absolute pillars of global leadership of this network. And I say that not to please, but just to tell you what treasures you have in this university. Because what you're doing here, John and Rebecca are making known to hundreds of universities around the world. One of the important contributions recently was a guide how universities can and should take on the Sustainable Development Goals, how to get started with these UN goals. And it's a compelling guide that could not have been written except for the fact that you're doing it here at Monash, doing it across faculties, doing it with tremendous inspiration, creativity, energy of the students, guidance of a wonderful faculty, and a growing global reach. And that comes through in this guide, and it makes it compelling for universities around the world. That's just one of the many contributions that Monash Sustainable Development Institute is making to this worldwide effort. What I'd like to spend a few minutes describing to you this evening is why that effort is so important, why this is not a nice thing to do, or a clever thing to do, or a pleasant thing to do, but actually an essential thing to do. I believe we have no choice at great universities like Monash and like my own home university, Columbia University, but to take on the great global challenges right now and help to find urgently needed solutions to these challenges. Time is short. We love our lives. We love all that we have accomplished and that our forebears have accomplished. And yet there is, even when we don't necessarily see it directly, there is a tremendous fragility to what we have and what we want and what we aspire to for our children and our grandchildren. And it behooves us to make sure that all of the blessings that we enjoy, the incredible prosperity, the chance to meet in peace in one of the great cities of the world, to enjoy each other's company and to honor and support great academic research and thinking, that this continues, and it continues in a way that can be shared around the world. And I ask you not to take it for granted, because there is nothing certain in that continuity. And indeed, there is much to worry about. And I hope it's not impolite of me, impolitic of me, to bring a few worries into a wonderful and lovely evening. But I think it is our responsibility to worry and then to work towards allaying those concerns. For me, probably the most succinct, powerful, and eloquent description of modern times was given by my favorite president of my lifetime, John F. Kennedy, when in his inaugural address in 1961, he said, "For the world is very different now. Mankind holds in his mortal hands the ability to end all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life." And I think in that one sentence, Kennedy described the fate of modern times, which is that we are inheritors of scientific and technological knowledge that make it possible, literally, for us to end all forms of human poverty. Astounding. Humanity has known poverty from its beginnings 200,000 years ago as our species. And yet, because of our collective knowledge, produced, I want to add, by great universities over the last 1,000 years in particular, that have given astounding advances in knowledge of how the world operates, how physics works, and how technology can be mobilized for our benefit. Ending poverty is within our reach. But the converse is also true. The scale of our capacities, the scale of 7.6 billion people, and the range of activities, and indeed our scientific knowledge, also make harrowingly real the second part of Kennedy's sentence, the ability to end all forms of human life. When Kennedy was speaking, clearly he was thinking about thermonuclear war, which was the momentous issue of his time, but remains the dark shadow of our time. And to the Nobel laureates that we celebrated, your alums in ICANN and the movement to end nuclear weapons, another round of applause. There is no more important work than that. And one thing we've learned about nuclear weapons is that it's a miracle that we're here, because we're not so good as to avoid disaster, and we need to get rid of these weapons. But what Kennedy could not have appreciated in 1961 is something that we now know also to be true, and that is we can end the existence of millions of species on this planet and profoundly undermine and threaten our own survival, and at a minimum, the survival of millions or hundreds of millions of people through our effects on the natural environment. This is something that was unimaginable to earlier generations. One great scientist, one of the greatest scientists of the modern age, a Swedish Nobel laureate chemist in 1896, by paper and pencil, understood that we would warm the planet. Svante Arrhenius made the first calculations with uncanny insight more than 120 years ago. But he imagined that it would take 750 years to reach a doubling of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and he thought that it would broadly be a benign experience. What we now know is that in a world of 7.6 billion people, of rapid economic growth, which I'll describe to you in a moment, of an industrial age built on fossil fuels, and of the just very bad luck, because it's nothing more than that carbon dioxide has certain quantum mechanical characteristics, that it absorbs infrared radiation and therefore has the effect of trapping heat in the Earth's atmosphere. We have created a bit of a mess for ourselves. We have created a world economy of great wealth, great sophistication, incredible division of labor, built on a fossil fuel economy of which this country and my country, the United States, are two of the world leaders. But now we know that while there's nothing intrinsically moral or immoral about fossil fuel or coal or any other, that by bad luck, this is now an extraordinary danger to us and to the future of the planet. Just bad luck. Because there are many molecules that do not trap infrared radiation. But CO2, which is the byproduct of combustion of coal, oil, and gas, happen to do so. And this is an existential challenge for us that links back to President Kennedy's insight. We hold in our hands, even more than was true in 1961, the ability to end human suffering of kinds that we thought were out of our control. We visited today on the Monash campus a World Mosquito Control Program, where your scientists here, with incredible brilliance and ingenuity, have discovered that through detailed work over more than a decade, that it's possible to infect the mosquito that transmits dengue fever, for example, Aedes aegypti, and inoculate it in a way with a bacterium which makes the mosquito unable to transmit dengue, and to release those mosquitoes and thereby control a disease which is a very harrowing disease. How much brilliance is that, by the way? And this is happening. We saw those little critters, fortunately, in their cage. This is amazing work of this university. So that's what we can do. But we also know that we have approached by now, by this evening, literally by the time of a report that was issued last week, essentially the end of the story of safety. And that I want to impress upon you as thought leaders in this country, a great country. And by the way, I can tell you I'm a co-editor of the World Happiness Report. And I can tell you objectively, you are one of the happiest places on the whole planet. And we're grateful for that because you make us feel happy too. But I do want to impress upon you, we have run out of time. Fortunately, you're running out of prime ministers too. But we have run out of time for action. What did last week's report say? This is the report about by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on how to achieve the goals that we set in Paris 3 years ago. What it said was we have 10 years left in which a world effort of unprecedented focus and persistence could still keep us away from the dangers that we pledged to avoid, but that we're essentially running out of time to stay below the 1.5 degrees Celsius. What does that mean? Let me give you one indication of what it means. It means technically that the Earth has warmed already 1.1 degrees above the pre-industrial level, above the temperature when James Watt invented the steam engine that was going to use all the wonderful coal in this country and in UK and in the United States and elsewhere. We've already warmed 1.1 degrees Celsius. We've already built in further warming, not because of future emissions, but because the oceans are still catching up with the energy imbalance of the atmosphere, given how much CO2 we've already put in the atmosphere. So we built in perhaps another 0.2 or 0.3 degrees C that is just waiting to happen over time. That means our margin to stay below 1.5 degrees is essentially gone. A shame because we've wasted the last 26 years after signing the agreement that we would make the planet safe in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit. We've run out of what's called the carbon budget, which is the amount of CO2 that could be released and avoid certain thresholds of danger. Now, let me calibrate the danger for you for just a moment. I was director of an institute like the Monash Sustainable Development Institute for 14 years at Columbia University called the Earth Institute. It was a completely nerve-wracking job because it is no fun to direct an institute of climate scientists. They bring you bad news every day. They make you very unhappy. They're very smart, by the way. They know what they're talking about. They're geniuses. They both use physical chemistry, quantum mechanics, Earth system dynamics, paleoclimatology, incredible insights of reading the Earth's past to be able to understand how what we're doing is affecting the future prospects. One of my colleagues, named James Hansen, whose name some of you may know, because he's America's most famous climate scientist. He was the climate scientist for NASA for 30 years before retiring from NASA and joining the Columbia University faculty. Studied throughout his life how the Earth systems work, He is a genius. He's a wonderful man, completely terrifying in what he tells you. And one of the things that he told me 10 years ago, which is now being confirmed, study after study after study, catching up with Dr. Hansen, is that when the Earth was at 1.5 degrees C, that means 1.5 degrees C warmer than, say, in the year 1800, just a little bit more than we are right now. The last time the Earth was that warm was 115,000 years ago in a geologic epoch called the Eemian period. And in the Eemian period, there is an uncomfortable truth, or what Al Gore called an inconvenient truth. The sea level in the Eemian, at that slight increase of temperature above today, was 8 meters higher than now, which really bothers me, because I live on a small island called Manhattan. And we were smart enough to buy a 3rd-floor apartment flat, because we'll take a boat into our apartment. But we're courting disaster for hundreds of millions of people and for coastal cities. Dare I name another? And we are so close to this kind of runaway risk that our reports are ever more alarming, as last week's was. When that report was issued, your deputy premier immediately said, Mr. McCormick, we're not going to do what just any old report says. Why should we do that? My suggestion to your honorable vice premier is read the report. You'll know why you should do that. One of the things that is said in the report, incidentally, is absolutely pertinent for this country. And that is that there is no scenario of safety in which coal plays a large role. So that is a real challenge for us to face. We've heard today, by the way, brilliant ideas at the university and in the Victorian government with projects with Japan on ways that coal can continue to play some role. And that is through technologies like carbon capture and storage, technologies where the coal, for example, would be converted to hydrogen with the CO2 captured and safely stored away. That is a potential pathway that could be very good economically and safe as well. But it will not be the massive exports of coal to coal-burning thermal plants in India or in China or in other parts of the world. That cannot exist in the future, in a future of safety. So this is really our challenge. It's the one that President Kennedy told us about in 1961, but now for our generation. The reason I love President Kennedy is that he was an inspiring leader who could help a country and indeed the world to move forward. One of the things that made my childhood so much fun in the 1960s was that when I was 6.5 years old, President Kennedy on May 25th, 1961, spoke to the Congress and said, I believe this country should adopt a goal before this decade is out of sending a man to the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. And that, by the way, was accomplished 8 years later. And I raise that because we need our moonshot of our generation. We need leaders that will say, here is where we need to go for the sake of our well-being, the sake of the planet, the sake of our children. It's interesting when President Kennedy gave that speech, by the way. He said in the following sentences, and I can only paraphrase, that no project in space will be so important or so impressive. And then he said, and none will be more difficult or expensive. So here was a leader who said to the Congress, not piece of cake, it's easy. It's going to pay for itself, which is what our politicians today would say. Or we'll privatize it. Or maybe they would say, we'll have a space program, we'll see where it goes. President Kennedy said, we will go to the moon and back before the end of this decade, and nothing will be more difficult or expensive to do. He didn't actually say, we will do it. He said, I recommend that we do this. He then went on in his speech, by the way, which is a beautiful speech. You can listen to it online or read it. He described all of the difficulties and how expensive it would be. And he made a pertinent observation. He said, do not do this if we're going to stop halfway. It's no good going halfway to the moon. And so he said, I call on all Americans to think long and hard, should we take this up? And of course, at the end of the speech, rousing ovation in Congress, and everybody said yes. And off America went on its moonshot. And what did the United States do, by the way? It brought in the best minds in the United States, and especially as I've talked to your deans, I'm in love with engineers. I have complete engineer envy as an economist, because engineers know how to get something done. They're very practical. So NASA hired thousands of young engineers, and they figured out how to do this, by the way, because when President Kennedy called for the moonshot, they had no idea how to do it. And it took 18 months to figure out the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo sequence of how they would send a lunar module and do all the things that Neil Armstrong ended up leading as he stepped onto the surface of the moon. Now, President Kennedy also had very good advice about leadership. And this is advice that comes from a later phase, which I adore, of President Kennedy, which was his last mission as president, and it was really his mission as global statesperson, and that was to stop, as best he could, the nuclear arms race, because we had just nearly destroyed the world in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he realized enough was enough, and his counterpart Nikita Khrushchev realized enough was enough, and in 1963 they worked towards the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And in arguing for that treaty, he said something also very apposite for us in our time. He said, in talking about how to pursue peace, by defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we help all people to see it, to draw hope from it, and to move irresistibly toward it. This is a succinct explanation of great leadership. Define your goal more clearly, make it seem more manageable and less remote, and you will draw people towards it. I mention this because this is the work now that we and great universities like Monash University need to lead. And one of the units of the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, ClimateWorks, which some of you have generously supported, is doing exactly that, and in an absolutely compelling way. If we're going to end the profound danger of human-induced climate change, we have to help people to understand the solutions, not just the risks. We need people to understand the goal of decarbonizing the energy system, but that's a very nebulous, complicated idea for people. So we have to make the goal more manageable and less remote. We have to explain what is the path to climate safety. And ClimateWorks led a very important project here called the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project for Australia as part of a global effort, but the Australian team played a wonderful global role of saying, here's how this can work. And by the way, this country, like the United States, is blessed with so many options. You have the best sunshine on the planet to tap. You've got a wonderful desert, by the way. Deserts are great because they collect a lot of photons, they don't compete for food, and you could power the world from the Australian deserts. It just takes a transmission line like the one that connects Tasmania with the mainland. And this can be done throughout Asia to carry your solar energy to Asia, to China, to Indonesia, to the rest of the world. The science and the technology exists already. So ClimateWorks helped to define a pathway that is rigorous, convincing, and can bring people in to understand, yes, I can support that. This isn't going to destroy Australia's economy. This isn't going to end prosperity. This is not the end of using electricity. This is exactly the direction we need, and this would be an energy powerhouse of renewable energy for the world. And you can do that countless ways, by the way. You can burn your coal and capture and store the CO2 and export the hydrogen, as in the Victoria, Japan project that is underway to demonstrate this. You can use your solar energy and make synthetic liquid fuels. You can put a high voltage direct current power line up into Indonesia and then into Asia, as China wants to do. And you could help power China cleanly, which would be a wonderful contribution also in a country that is completely enveloped in punishing black carbon right now that is killing millions of people in China. And they'd actually like blue skies as well. And you can help provide the blue skies, earn a big market, and help save the Earth all at the same time. So this is what ClimateWorks helped to show, and its ideas have been adopted by the Victoria state government. They have been adopted in part in Queensland. They are being adopted in other states of this country. That is a great contribution of a great university. Yesterday, we inaugurated another project that will have equal import for this country and for the world. And that is ClimateWorks taking on the challenge of sustainable land use in this country. Because we're destroying biodiversity. We are causing the extinction of millions of species because we're not taking care to say no to land use which is overriding ecosystems and the habitats of every other species on this planet. And that will come back to devastate us as well. We need the other species. They're nice to have around. Our food supplies don't work without them. That's one small point. And so we need to protect the biodiversity. So yesterday, we launched a project here that will bring CSIRO and Deakin University and Monash University together, wonderful scientists, on scoping out what sustainable land use in Australia in an era of climate change, when we need to store carbon and protect biodiversity, will really entail. And once again, Monash will play a role not only in helping Australia to find the path forward, but in helping, through universities around the world, to undertake similar work so that this can become a global effort. One of the wonderful things about universities is that we speak so naturally to each other in any part of the world. Tomorrow, Sonia and I, unfortunately, take an early leave and fly to Tsinghua University in Beijing, where we'll spend a couple of days. But I can tell you the conversations which will be around these themes will be readily understandable because we'll be within a global community of scientists and knowledge that shares insights, data, a language that transcends cultures, a language which recognizes the common interests of humanity. And this is one of the reasons why I love great universities and love the idea of universities so much. I have to tell you, we're going to be at a university named Aristotle University in Aristotle's hometown well, not hometown, but nearby his hometown of Stagira. Shortly, Aristotle invented, Plato, I could say, invented the idea of the university, his academy, Aristotle, with his Lyceum. And we are the inheritors of that idea of communities of knowledge that can understand the needs of each generation and how we can help all peoples to benefit from knowledge and also to be good stewards so that we can protect the earth for the next generations. Well, this is why I'm so profoundly honored to be with you today and why I call on all of you as friends of Monash University to support this wondrous institution. It's one of the world's great centers of learning and knowledge. Its recognition in the world is soaring. Its role in global problem solving is soaring. It is not only an agent of understanding and insight and solutions, but like all universities, it is an agent of peace as well. And let me close on that theme. We are still not away from the kind of dangers that President Kennedy talked about, the military dangers. We are in an armed world, and we have instability. There is no balance of power, by the way, because as the Greek philosophers told us a long time ago, all is flux. Don't hope for balance. Hope to manage change. And in a world armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons and with the potential of distrust, and I'm sorry to say it, but I don't mean to inject politics in an unhappy way, but my president is crazy. So take care. It's a dangerous time. We have a lot of instability. And now the U.S. has launched a trade war with China. And it's going to call on Australia, take sides. You're with us. This is an incredibly dangerous way to think. Incredibly naive and stupid way to think. What we need to do is get Monash and Tsinghua and Beida and Melbourne University and others and your business sector and politicians working together, not choosing sides. And the last thing in the world we need is a trade war, which will heat up to something worse, by the way. Because what is China's concern if you think about its history of the last 2 centuries? Its concern is that Western powers keep it from developing. And that, by the way, is precisely what my crazy country is trying to do right now. This isn't about trade imbalances or trade issues. Those you handle in Geneva at the World Trade Organization. This is about a neurotic security state that says, how can China be gaining on us so much? But what China's gaining is just development. It wants to be enjoying the same benefits we're enjoying this evening. It wants living standards not 1/4 of Australia's or the United States, but commensurate. It wants to have the benefits of technology. It wants to have clean air. It actually wants to solve the climate problem. It would love to be using your photons for powering its electric vehicles rather than creating smog by burning your coal. So we're looking for solutions. And there is no intrinsic reason for conflict. There is absolutely no reason to take sides. But certain times the mentality is us versus them. And I just ask you, finally, to resist that mentality, and in this wonderful country, so blessed and so prosperous and so happy and so capable, to use that to promote peace and to absolutely resist any ill-conceived ideas of choosing sides. The only side we need to choose is the side of peace and the side of sustainable development for all. And I will close one more time with the words of my favorite president in my lifetime, with President Kennedy, because he taught not only how to make goals, and he taught about the fragility of our time, but he also taught why cooperation is feasible. And these were words that he said in encouraging Nikita Khrushchev, his counterpart, to sign a nuclear test ban treaty. And by the way, by saying words of peace, Nikita Khrushchev, just to give you a moment of history, listened to Kennedy's speech, called the US envoy in Moscow, Averell Harriman, brought him to the Kremlin and said, "Mr. Harriman, your president gave the finest speech of any American president since Franklin Roosevelt, and I want to make peace with him." And 5 weeks after that speech, they signed the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And a few weeks after that, Kennedy was killed. And some people think because he went for peace. And that's not an unreasonable idea, in fact. But what Kennedy said in this speech is really important for us, a time when we're feeling this shaking, these talks of wars, and all of this us versus them, and trying to break agreements with Iran, and many, many dangerous things coming from Washington these days. What President Kennedy said is this. He said, "So let us not be blind to our differences, but let us direct attention to our common interests and to the means by which those differences can be reduced. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common fate is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air, we all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal." Monash University, thank you so much.